Hey neighbor, another Sunday is standing at the doorstep, which can only mean one thing. It's time for another episode of 7 on Sunday! Last year I pinpointed 7 bands who never topped their incredible debut albums, but today, let's put the spotlight on the artist that stepped it up big time and completely avoided what critics commonly call the sophomore slump. For anyone who might be in the dark, number 1, turn a light on. But more importantly, the sophomore album is your second album, just like your sophomore year of high school or college. In the music industry, it's widely been seen as a problem when it comes to making an equally stunning second album after blowing everyone's minds the first time around. Commercial success wasn't a factor for this list. It doesn't matter how big or popular they were, it's about the quality of the music, even though some of these are very famous albums. I intentionally sidestepped some of my normal picks, the artist or band that you would typically expect me to pick for this channel, because I felt that we needed some much needed variety, both in terms of genre and sound. Yeah, I could have picked Sam's Town by The Killers, Weezer's Pinkerton, Nirvana's Nevermind, Panic at the Disco's Pretty Odd, or even Favorite Worst Nightmare by the Arctic Monkeys, because those are all phenomenal second outings. But the point of this series is to cover new territory in addition to the familiar faces. So I'm excited to show you my picks for the opposite of the sophomore slump. Want to see me do this again, or better yet, make a companion episode on artists whose sophomore album was their best album? Get this video to 1,000 likes and comment below, and I'll make that reality happen in the near future. But for now, buckle up and throttle the time machine, because we're headed back to the 80s. Gouge away. You can't gouge away. Stay all day. Guys, I am so sorry that I haven't found more time to talk about Pixies, because you better believe I love me some Pixies. Admittedly, it's mostly the early stuff that I'm into, especially when Kim Deal was more heavily involved in the writing process, but Pixies in general, you really can't go wrong. Such a fresh sound that hasn't aged a damn day, even though the records I'm talking about in this video came out in the late 80s. Talk to any rock musician that rose to prominence in the 90s, and they'll tell you just how vital Pixies were to the alt-rock, pop, and grunge market. All of those infrastructures branched out into their own thriving ecosystems, but not before bands like them laid the foundation. Surfer Rosa was indeed their first full-length album, although some would argue for Come On Pilgrim, even though it's only a mini LP, and its incredibly refreshing sound was trademarked by compelling drums, rotated male-female vocals, and a noisy pop-meets-rock hybrid that saw some beautifully bizarre swerves to keep the listener guessing. Instead of burning out, they blazed the trail ahead on one of the most satisfying sophomore albums you'll ever hear, Doolittle. I can't quite remember how I was introduced to Pixies, although I want to say it was through the closing scene of Fight Club, but the first time I knew them past my initial liking of Where Is My Mind was via Rock Band, everyone's favorite plastic instrument game, whose soundtrack featured the classic Wave of Mutilation from Doolittle. You're not gonna find too many people on the planet that think this is some sort of unworthy follow-up to Surfer Rosa. In fact, many people, including myself, think it's even better. It's the perfect slap to the senses that strikes just about every chord you could imagine. There's the pop-friendly smash, Here Comes Your Man, suspenseful vocal duel, I Bleed, that nails home the best early Pixies qualities, the loudmouth jubilant Debaser, and my personal favorite Gouge Away, a song so rooted in darkness, it just feels like it's ready to explode at any time. Pixies blew past the idea of a sophomore slump in one swift motion. Doolittle just doesn't feel like 38 minutes passing by. I mean, it's not. You're in the passenger seat for the entire joyride. But for now we are young, let us lay in the sun and count every beautiful thing we can see. Jeff Mangum was never cut out for the spotlight. Neutral Milk Hotel had a rather short initial run that ended with just 2 full-length albums, the second of those being one of the single biggest indie rock releases of all time. On Avery Island preceded this and stands out as a really great debut. Not a ton of people knew about that album at the time, sales were low, but they really started to gain traction on college radio stations and through some rigorous tours that didn't seem to faze Mangum and company, at least not at the time. Aeroplane must have been pretty polarizing initially, given that it wasn't instantly greeted as a classic, and I guess it's not that hard to see why, given that it's an indie rock album that rather strangely fixates on the Diary of Anne Frank while blissfully binging through a variety of different sounds on tons of unique instruments. Thankfully, Honestly, people started giving this album the credit it was due by the mid-2000s. A lot of that had to do with the devoted fan base who made this a slow-burning sensation that's already been passed down from one generation to the next. The songs still get attention, and deservedly so. They're often exceptional and just generally fucking awesome. Listen to the Untitled track and tell me you don't hear something wild. Wild, but completely captivating. The King of Carrot Flowers series has a ton of twists and turns, but it somehow flows together immaculately to open the album. The title track is full of quotable moments to balance out life, and without breaking down every single gory detail, let's just leave it at the fact that this is a perfect album. It's a rare but compelling case of the artist stepping away after releasing their classic, and while Neutral Milk Hotel did tour in the 2010s, it looks like In the Aeroplane Over the Sea will forever be their final full album statement. There's a lot of pop stars that blew up with their second album, but bitch, she's Madonna. Of course I saved a spot for the Queen of Pop. Everyone should know about how big of an impact she had on the culture of the 80s and beyond, but what about her stellar sophomore set that was dropped just a year after she put out her beloved debut? Like a virgin set in stone, that Madonna wasn't just here to make your average run-of-the-mill pop album, she was here to dominate the industry and break the rules. In retrospect, what was considered risque in 1984 wouldn't spin any heads in 2020. Our culture became more sex-positive thanks to people like Madonna taking chances and slam-dunking some records in the process. Many of you probably don't know how much I really do like a lot of her 80s and 90s work, and have only really seen me criticize her more recent output, but to anyone who claims to have an interest in pop, her second album is essential listening, bolstered by its flirtatious title track and the pendulum of swaying emotions tucked away in the track listing. Flawless? No. Excellence in dancey synth pop though? Yeah, there's no argument that's even worth pitting against her. She's in full control as she zips through the rollicking dance floor anthem Into the Groove, emotional ballad Love Don't Live Here Anymore, that one always gets me, in addition to the groovy Dress You Up with its chipper bass line and that roaring guitar solo. Madonna sold the world on her provocative image, but the actual music and lyrics were often much more coy in nature than what the publications of yesteryear would have led you to believe. Strip away the clothes and she's a bad influence. Strip away the controversies and you've got an honest-to-God, really solid, diamond-certified record that proves she wasn't just a passing fad, she was on the road to becoming a pop culture icon.
Testify, come up in the spot looking extra fly. Yeah. For the day I die, I'ma test the sky.
You know, part of me looks at talking about Kanye West like Kanye West as a person, Kanye West as a producer. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with this one. Ye's old stuff is next level. If The College Dropout was the first drop of blood in the water, Late Registration was the equally good shark swimming straight to it faster than you could have ever imagined. Hip-hop was at a crossroads by the mid-2000s as commercial rap was starting to dominate the charts, yet it still had a lot of the sonic touches of the 90s scene and the pioneers of the movement. Kanye switched up the whole game with his brand of hip-hop, boldly tackling societal issues and politics without sacrificing his full sense of humor. It was a pretty common theme throughout his first 3 albums, and that common thread has always made these feel a bit timeless, even if I don't get quite as much mileage out of them as I used to. Late Registration didn't feel the need to lean heavily into the mainstream sound of the time, despite the success of Dropout, instead taking a turn for the breezy, as much of this record feels rather subdued and chill, even if the lyrical stakes are way higher. It can occasionally wander down the wrong path, and it's certainly not a perfect record, but the fact that Ye followed up his dynamite landing with a 70-minute rap classic says a lot about both his dominance on both a lyrical and production side of his artistry.
Everything loud and clear. But nobody's listening. Call to you so clearly.
Debating which of Linkin Park's early albums defined the group and stands out as the better record is probably always going to be a big argument for music fans, but the real takeaway here should be, holy smokes, how many bands come right out of the gate firing on all cylinders to the point where it's undeniable how powerful and important their first 2 punches are. Meteora still gets me foaming at the mouth with fanboy-like energy, and I own that completely, given that I think it's the band's best album. Not only did they make a more compact version of what they did on Hybrid Theory, they nailed it better and did it with a 13-song album with 0 skippable tracks, an absolute beast that never backs down and does an unbelievably good job at relaying the raw feeling of anger, pain, emptiness, and so much more to the listener. Looking for answers in songs you can relate to is so important to anyone in life, especially teenagers though. Not that they didn't nail this down the first time around, considering how therapeutic those songs can be for a myriad of reasons, but look at how tight Mike Shinoda and Chester Bennington sound as they bounce from verse to rhyme to hook, line, and sinker. They don't fucking miss, and neither does the band, considering the skill of guitarist Brad Delson, or the mastermind Joe Hahn, literally scratching his way to the surface as he helps define a good portion of Meteora, not to mention his insane instrumental cut session. The sound of glass being smashed guides you in, wasting no time before ripping the scab off and pushing us all into the world of Don't Stay. The momentum never stops, which still blows my mind. It's 100% swing and connect over and over again to the point where you'll be screaming along to Lying From You, pouring your heart out to Numb, transcending when nobody's listening, and tying it all back together by learning every word to Mike's raps on Faint. Without a doubt, the weight of the world was on Linkin Park's back as everyone started to look to this band as the clear leaders for not only nu metal, but for this new middle ground known as rap rock that these men were clearly lethal at. They took the pressure and made a diamond, an album that helped me during some of my darkest moments of self-hatred, and one that millions around the world still rely on like an old friend. It might not be quite as good as Hybrid Theory to some, but to most, it's a worthy companion that absolutely proved that Linkin Park were here to stay. Metalheads in my audience are probably blinking in disbelief right now, given how starved for content they've gotta be. Given my lack of involvement with the genre over the years, sorry about that. But even if it's not my forte, excellence is excellence, and my dudes, Ride the Lightning is unsurprisingly most excellent.
Be excellent to each other.
Okay, I gotta get my head out of the 80s. I think I might be stuck in some sort of time loop here. Before I do that, might I just say how killer Ride the Lightning is, especially compared to its menacing but not as great debut, Kill 'Em All? 1984 was the year Metallica spat fire a mile high, and I truly think this was the start of something bigger, not just for them, but for heavy metal as a genre. To prove that, they opened the record on an acoustic guitar, hammered out the genre's first power ballad with the incredible Fade to Black, and unleashed one of their most iconic songs ever, For Whom the Bell Tolls. It's brilliant in the sense that they're still extremely rough around the edges, especially from a production point of view, but there's also a melodic lining to the LP that just wasn't there before. Pulverizing riffage dials the headbanging up to 11, meaning this is a super fun album to spin because of its unrelenting aggression. Look at that insane spiraling guitar work that cuts through on Trapped Under Ice. They just never seem to miss a chance to add something unexpected or else thrilling, as evidenced by their guitar work, Lars Ulrich's drumming, and of course their unmistakable frontman James Hetfield. It's a second album for the history books, one that both opens and closes on a twist of fate that only fans of the album can truly understand.
Super cut of us. Oh, it's just a super cut of us.
Lord have mercy, one of the greatest second album achievements I have ever witnessed is right here before our very eyes. We told you this was Melodrama too, but somehow the masses didn't seem to flock to her superior work the way they did to her debut album Pure Heroin in 2013. If you know, you know. Critics adored this masterpiece, and so did her dedicated fans. It's one of the best albums of the 2010s, and it proved that this New Zealand artist was content to take her time and not rush a final product that simply wasn't up to par. After shedding her old skin as well as a primary producer, Ella O'Connor moved to the highly sought after pop god Jack Antonoff, whose collaborations to this record are breathtaking and crucial as they bring the highly elusive feeling of originality to this album's bones. Melodrama roars with life spilling out at every single pore, and it's unforgettable for that very reason. Her ability to emote, regardless of the track's tempo or mood, says so much about her ability to write. I mean, it's not like the DNA of these songs is fundamentally different from everything that you've ever heard and ever. It's the magic wand that she somehow waves over the subjects that manifest into metaphors and illusions that drive the mind's eye to a state of euphoria. Whether you're looking to cry your eyes out to the alarmingly real liability, or you're tapping your foot along to the gentle strum of the Louvre, which uses a French art museum as a genius metaphor for a relationship, this album never skips a beat without chokeholding your attention. Even if you're not into pop, this album is going to blow you away if you've never experienced it in full. It's a classy classic that deserves even more widespread attention because it's simply that marvelous. I couldn't talk about all the incredible sophomore albums I wanted to, so be sure to like the video if you do want to see part 2 in the future. Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts on any of these records, and if you want to see me breaking down artists that never topped their first album, then tap this card here. Shout out to my $50 patrons Brandon, Cleo, Jamie, Seth, and Dayton. If you want to help support content like this, then sign up at the top link down below or else the card on screen. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back in the neighborhood very soon, right here on ARTV.